Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Physics of God, How the Deepest Theories of Science Explain Religion, and How the Deepest Truths of Religion Explain Science, by Joseph Selbie, foreword by Amit Goswami, narrated by Runnette. Foreword. Joseph Selbie's The Physics of God is a unique and welcome addition to the growing literature for the scientific evidence for God. Why is this important? To begin with, it runs counter to a misconceived bias that has dominated scientific thought now for several centuries. In the 17th century, Isaac Newton gave us a mathematical science that all but eliminated the idea of God intervening in the material world of physics and chemistry. In the same century, another scientist, René Descartes, laid the foundation for championing the use of reason to develop the natural sciences. Ever since then, and following the prevalent notion of Christianity actually, Western scientists have generally held the notion that animals are machines. This intellectual attitude stands true even today. That is, almost. In the 19th century, Charles Darwin's theory of biological evolution suggested that living beings have a hereditary component, which we now recognize as genes, that undergoes changes called mutation. Through the process of natural selection, nature selects among these variations those that help the species to adapt to the ever-changing environment. In time, this process leads to speciation. Since Western science maintained that animals are machines, and Darwin was saying that we are descendants of monkeys, doesn't it follow that humans are machines too? When later genes were experimentally discovered, and even the structure of the DNA molecule of which genes are part was figured out, the view grew that biology is nothing but an extension of chemistry. Biologists and most other scientists with them assumed that everything about life will sooner or later be unraveled by the science of biology, leaving nothing for God to do. God's intervention, even in the affairs of the living, seemed to have been ruled out. In the 20th century, a few scientists, Einstein, for example, held on to the idea of a benign God in what is called the philosophy of deism. But the notion that God is dead took hold in the scientific mainstream that soon promulgated the idea of a new philosophy by which to do science, scientific materialism. This philosophy says that every phenomenon is a material phenomenon in space and time, caused by material interaction. There is nothing but matter. This philosophy is clearly a dogma. Selbie calls it a religion, correctly, I think. It has given humanity a polarized perspective, torn between God and science the world over, and specifically with dire consequences in America. Selbie addresses this polarization directly and adroitly, showing how science and religion, far from being incompatible, share a deep congruence. Scientific materialists thought seriously through much of the 20th century that life itself will be produced in the laboratory from non-living matter, putting the whole question of whether God is needed or not to rest. Unfortunately, despite biology's many spectacular successes, the questions of what is life and can life be produced from non-life have remained unanswered. Meanwhile, Darwin's theory itself has come under fire, with revelations that suggest that it really does not explain the details of available fossil data. Other compelling data exists against scientific materialism. In scientific materialism, all communication is local, via signals. But as this author and many others have discussed, there is much evidence in favor of signal-less, that is, non-local communication, both in the micro and the macro domain of matter. Among these signal-less communications are distance viewing and near-death experiences. Especially the latter is spectacular. The evidence proves that there is consciousness even after the brain dies. So consciousness has to occur even before the brain exists, right? Some of the most compelling evidence against scientific materialism has come from quantum physics, the latest paradigm of physics that has replaced Newtonian physics. In quantum physics, objects are waves of possibility that reside in a domain of reality called the domain of potentiality, where communication is instantaneous, without signal, non-local. This domain must be outside the realms of space and time, where locality reigns. Non-local phenomena are referred to as paranormal by the mainstream scientists, but that designation is obviously prejudiced in light of quantum physics. So if the philosophy of scientific materialism is wrong, can we conclude that God does exist? Does it mean that God is scientifically verifiable, that there is, in fact, a physics of God? Selbie makes a concise and convincing case that there is. He draws from the transcendent testimony of mystics the world over, as well as from the findings of string theory, David Bohm's version of quantum physics, quantum biology, neuroscience, and quantum physics itself, to demonstrate that a physics of God is at hand. In my own view as a quantum physicist, quantum physics alone gives us God, but my personal view is beside the point. The point is that any serious thinking person can examine the data and the existing ideas of post-materialist thinking and figure out that God is back in science. Drawing on the work of leading scientists as well as leading mystics, Selbie has provided a wonderfully persuasive and clear argument for coming to that conclusion. The most important point is that with God back in the picture and backed up by science this time, we can go about founding a human science in which all human experiences are legitimate and scientific, including the spiritual. Others and I are working on that, and I am glad that Selbie has joined the effort. Listen to this book. It will help you, too, to gain this new perspective. The only qualification is that you see yourself as more than the soulless machine that many scientific materialists see. The rest, as Selbie describes it, is the beginning of life's greatest adventure. Amit Goswami, quantum physicist. Introduction. A love of science came to me early, and has stayed with me all my life. My family tree is full of doctors and engineers. My father studied at Princeton, Harvard, and MIT. My brother graduated from Georgia Tech. Dinner table conversation at home had to be backed up with references. In my college entrance exams, I was in the 99th percentile in science and math. I entered the University of Colorado confidently expecting to land a science degree, and I spent most of my first 2 years studying math, physics, microbiology, and chemistry. Then something happened that forever altered my course in life. I had a transcendent experience. Like many of my generation, I experimented with psychedelic drugs. In one life-transforming trip, I had an utterly beguiling experience. I became, to my delight, highly intuitive, serenely calm, and warmly heart-centered. My awareness subtly expanded to take in everything from the glow of life in a plant to the hidden feelings of my companions. I felt myself to be more than a body. At the heart of my experience were expansive feelings of boundless peace, joy, and well-being, feelings that seemed completely natural, as if the person I had always been simply woke up. I had never felt more joyful, more alive, or more at peace in all my life. It was beyond wonderful. The experience stayed with me for several days, long after any trace of the drug could have remained in my system. I realized then that the drug could only have triggered the experience, and that the source of that experience had to be an integral part of who I am. The realization that my experience was not simply an ephemeral hallucination set me on a personal quest to find out how to live in that amazing, transcendent state all the time. There was nothing I knew about science at that time that could explain what I had experienced. Abruptly changing my major from microbiology to philosophy, I took a deep dive into Western metaphysics. Eagerly, I immersed myself in Plato, Aristotle, Hume, Kierkegaard, Kant, Nietzsche, Sartre, and many Christian theologians, including Augustine and Aquinas. Though I found some inspiration in my several-year-long swim through Western philosophy, I did not find what I was hoping to find. Western philosophy tends to be dryly intellectual. I learned almost nothing to help me bridge the gap between the heady thoughts of these philosophers and my heartfelt transcendent experience. Not satisfied, I transferred to UC Berkeley, where I studied, with deepening interest, the philosophies of Buddhism, Jainism, Taoism, and Hinduism. These philosophies began to narrow the gap between theoretical knowledge and my actual transcendent experience, because unlike most of the Western philosophers who relied on reason and logic to arrive at an intellectual understanding of consciousness and matter, the Eastern sages relied on methodical and repeated transcendent experiences to arrive at an experiential understanding of consciousness and matter. The difference between the Western and Eastern approaches is like the difference between talking about a meal and eating one. And I soon learned that the secret to eating the meal is meditation. I was drawn to meditation for the same reasons I was drawn to science. It was precise, rational, and most crucially, provided verifiable results. No belief required. Meditation is the objective instrument of discovery in what I've come to understand as the science of religion. In meditation, at last, I had discovered a practical and effective means of attaining the transcendent awareness and joy that I had only accidentally stumbled upon through my use of psychedelic drugs. To my delight, I also discovered that embracing the science of religion did not mean that I had to abandon the science of matter. It did not mean that I had to cast aside the rational and the practical. It did not mean that I had to deny the findings of science. I found that the laws that govern the physical world are inextricably interconnected with the laws that govern the subtle world to which meditation gives one access. I realized that there is no conflict between science and religion at all. Those who use the science of religion to explore reality are simply using another method to discover the same truths as science reveals. Let me share one intriguing example. Annie Besant and Charles Ledbetter were prominent members of the Theosophical Society from 1895 to 1933. During that time, they conducted, by means of deep meditation, investigations into the nature of atoms. They systematically observed many different types of atoms, ranging from gases to metals. They described and drew hundreds of diagrams of what they observed in a series of journals. You can imagine how the notion of the psychic investigation of atoms was received by the particle physics community in the 1920s. Several years after the passing of Besant and Ledbetter, physicist Stephen M. Phillips studied their journals. He was struck by a recurring detail that appeared in many of their diagrams. They drew 3 dark areas in each proton and neutron in the nucleus of the atom. Today, scientists believe that all protons and neutrons are made up of 3 quarks. But this was not known to science during the lifetimes of Besant and Ledbetter. Phillips concluded from this recurring depiction and from other details in their journals that Besant and Ledbetter had accurately described the number and nature of quarks years ahead of their discovery by modern physics. Dr. Phillips published his findings in the 1980 book Extrasensory Perception of Quarks. Besant's and Ledbetter's ability to perceive the correct number of quarks and protons and neutrons highlights a fundamental premise of this book. There is, and can only be, one reality. Those versed in the science of religion and those versed in the science of matter simply use different methods to explore the same reality. Material scientists discover its properties through rigorously controlled experimentation and call it reality. Spiritual scientists discover its properties through rigorously controlled transcendent experience and call it reality. How to unify the findings of science and religion, however, is not immediately obvious, thus the need for books like this one. The two approaches, material science and religious science, use very different languages. On the surface, these languages, as different as words and math, parables and laws, allegories and theories, appear to describe two completely different realities. Compounding that difficulty are popular biases. Many people in science and many people in religion fervently deny that their reality could have anything to do with the other. Like Victorian British aristocrats, aghast at the thought of mixing with ignorant foreigners, they consider the divide between science and religion deep and absolute. Yet if we look deeper, if we set aside the pervasive material bias of science and lift the obscuring fog of religious sectarianism, we can find a surprisingly clear unity of science and religion. In this unity, we discover that the explanations of transcendent phenomena given by enlightened saints and sages, miracles, life after death, heaven, God, and our ability to attain personal transcendent awareness are matched by explanations of material phenomena given by scientists in the fields of relativity, quantum physics, medicine, string theory, neuroscience, and quantum biology. In my decades-long exploration, I have come to appreciate that the findings of the science of religion and the findings of the science of matter together combine to give us the most complete view of reality, what I think of as the physics of God. Chapter 1. The Religion of Science. Making a case for an underlying unity of science and religion would be pointless were it true that science had already ruled out any basis for the beliefs underlying religion. Unfortunately, many people, not just scientists, believe that it is true. There are strong voices among scientists who fervently proclaim that science has indeed proven that all religious beliefs are unfounded, that religion is simply keeping alive baseless superstitions and other nonsense. At first glance, their arguments are compelling. They invoke the scientific method. They tell us that none of religion's claims have been proven in the laboratory. They assure us that their arguments rest firmly on factual scientific discovery. They speak with utter conviction. You will no doubt be surprised, therefore, and possibly affronted when I say that the people who hold such absolute views are simply true believers in their own religion, scientific materialism. Scientific materialism rests on the belief that everything there is or ever will be springs from the interactions of matter and energy, and from absolutely nothing else. Despite the existence of enduring major scientific mysteries, such as the origin of life and the nature of consciousness, scientific materialists believe that it is only a matter of time before all as yet unexplained phenomena will be explained by, and only by, the interactions of matter and energy. This expectation is an article of faith among those who embrace scientific materialism. It is their credo. Given science's undeniable success over the last 3 centuries, scientific materialism's matter and energy only hypothesis is very convincing to a lot of people. Science's means of exploring reality, the scientific method, is the oracle of the age. Using the scientific method, scientists have uncovered myriad laws governing the operation of the physical world. It is no exaggeration to say that the application of those laws over the last 2 centuries has transformed civilization. Unfortunately for other religions, the religion of scientific materialism is in the ascendant and very influential. Not just many scientists, but also a huge percentage of people in the world are unknowingly members of the Church of Scientific Materialism, because they have embraced the credo, everything that is or ever will be is the result of matter-energy interactions and nothing else. But make no mistake, the idea that everything that is and ever will be springs from the interactions of matter and energy and nothing else is a belief, not a proven fact. Despite the efficacy of the scientific method, it is not the case, as scientific materialists would have us think, that science has applied the scientific method to all possibilities for non-material realities and proven them all false. Rather, science, as an official body, has become so convinced of the truth of scientific materialism that it simply doesn't explore alternative possibilities. The bias toward material explanations for all phenomena is so strong that it nearly eliminates the possibility of funding for any scientific inquiry that attempts to explore realities other than the material. A vocal portion of scientists dismisses out of hand, or worse yet, holds in disdain, even the suggestion that there may be non-material solutions to unexplained phenomena. Embracing such a suggestion is not, to put it mildly, a path to a successful career in science. I recently read an article by Sebastian Anthony in the online magazine Extreme Tech. I picked it almost at random from many similar articles from which I could make the same point. He cites a recent scientific paper published by Max Tegmark of MIT. In his paper, Tegmark suggests that consciousness might be a quantum state of matter. What I found most interesting in the article was not the explanation of Tegmark's quantum state approach to consciousness, but a comment by the article's author. Consciousness has always been a tricky topic to broach scientifically. In most serious scientific circles, merely mentioning consciousness might result in the rescinding of your credentials and immediate exile to the land of quacks and occultists. Another article, appearing this time in Slate magazine, also recently caught my eye. Quantum and Consciousness Often Mean Nonsense, by Matthew Francis. The title itself speaks volumes. The author's patronizing tone in the article adds more volumes. It sounds good at first. We don't know exactly how some things in quantum physics work. We don't know exactly how to go from the brain to consciousness, so maybe consciousness is quantum. The problem with this idea? It's almost certainly wrong. My favorite sentence, after Francis magnanimously but ingenuously admits that science may not know everything, is his emphatic declaration. It's almost certainly wrong. Why? The answer to why isn't found in the current facts known to science, but in Francis's belief that all phenomena will eventually be explained by scientific materialism. Such belief engenders the attitude that hypotheses of any other kind are simply a waste of time. If you read the article, you can feel his impatience with people who don't try to find non-material solutions to still unexplained phenomena. Don't they get it, he seems to ask. Don't they know all this non-material stuff is ridiculous? Even rigorously conducted scientific studies that experiment with non-material notions such as consciousness, those few that do somehow manage to get funded, are granted no credibility by science's high priesthood. The scientists who perform peer reviews, the approvers or rejectors of papers submitted to prestigious scientific journals such as the Physical Review Letters, the New England Journal of Medicine, or Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. You would be hard-pressed to find in these journals any papers that stray from the orthodox view of scientific materialism. A case in point is the fate of several scientific papers that emerged from the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research, PAIR, program. PAIR was founded in 1979 by Robert G. John, then Dean of the Princeton School of Engineering and Applied Science. Despite the pedigree of Princeton University and of Professor John, and despite the overwhelmingly high quality of the science conducted, not one paper based on PAIR's successful proof of telekinesis was ever accepted by a respected scientific journal. PAIR's methodical practice of science was impeccable. PAIR conducted experiments for 27 years to determine whether individuals could affect material objects without physical contact. Among their experimental approaches, PAIR developed a variety of what they called random events generators, REGs, such as water fountains, cascading steel balls, pendulums, and electronic systems. The REGs were rigorously developed to be impervious to all known outside influences, such as vibration, pressure, temperature, and electromagnetism. No REGs were used in their experiments unless they had demonstrated precisely measurable results and maintained rock-solid consistency when left in isolation. Once a REG was determined to have rock-solid consistency, volunteers were then asked to try to alter its rock-solid consistency by their thoughts alone. For example, volunteers tried, without touching or influencing the devices in any physical way, to make more water flow in one channel of a fountain than the other, or to make more steel balls cascade to one side of a device than the other. Pear conducted these experiments for almost 3 decades, using hundreds of volunteers, in thousands of experiments, accumulating billions of data points. The results of these experiments revealed that nearly every volunteer had successfully altered the baseline distribution of the reg. The change from the baseline was often minuscule, but consistent to an overwhelmingly statistical meaningful degree. The odds against the possibility that Pear's experimental findings are merely the result of random events are several trillion to 1. In other words, practically speaking, there's no chance at all that their findings could be wrong. The volunteers successfully affected the behavior of physical systems using only their minds. Yet no prestigious scientific journal ever published their papers. Pear's findings, by every objective measure, were based on facts gathered in a stringently scientific manner, but because their findings fell outside scientific orthodoxy, they were not given any scientific legitimacy. There was recently a controversy when TED, the organization that presents talks by many leading-edge scientists and social thinkers, was pressured by a lobby of scientists to remove from its website talks given by Rupert Sheldrake and Graham Hancock. Sheldrake's talk presented 10 areas in which the scientific assumptions of today may be wrong. Hancock presented arguments for the independent existence of consciousness. At the insistence of TED's advisory group of scientists, both talks were removed from TED's website by the organizers. After a storm of protest in favor of Sheldrake and Hancock, TED's organizers attempted to make peace with both sides by restoring the talks to a little-accessed archive of talks buried deep in TED's website. I watched both presentations. Both men made good arguments and offered facts to back them up. In an ideal world, one in which the free discussion of ideas is allowed, these 2 talks would have been welcomed. Instead, they were banished to the margins of the Internet because they championed thoughts that fall outside the orthodox beliefs of scientific materialism. Not content with merely passively defending scientific orthodoxy, there are a few scientists who believe that the best defense is an active offense. A number of scientists have personally mounted campaigns to position religious belief as ideas for the weak-minded, as socially destructive anachronistic behavior, or outright fraudulent manipulation of the gullible. Just a few examples of their book titles make my point. Richard Dawkins's The God Delusion, Christopher Hitchens' God is Not Great, How Religion Poisons Everything, and Victor Stenger's God, the Failed Hypothesis, How Science Shows God Does Not Exist. These men are the self-appointed Grand Inquisitors of science. They try to debunk religion with a vengeance, lest members of their own flock should believe such heresy against science. Their claims have nothing to do with the scientific method and everything to do with the religion of science. Their claims say far more about human nature than about science. These men have more in common with TV evangelism than with cool scientific objectivity. Obscured by the notoriety of such men is the fact that most scientists are not scientific materialists. A 2009 Pew poll on religion found that only 41% of the scientists polled considered themselves to be atheists, while 51% believed in God, a universal spirit, or a higher power. Also obscured by such strident and materialistically biased points of view is the fact that science's own findings, when viewed without material bias, are far from proving that religious beliefs are unfounded and support the existence of transcendent realities such as consciousness. In the early 20th century, physicists witnessed the emergence of numerous paradoxical discoveries that challenged, and still challenge, the core assumptions of scientific materialism. Physicists discovered a hole in their understanding of matter, a gaping hole that came to be known as quantum physics, through which they fell to join Alice in Wonderland. In the 1920s, physicists discovered that light can behave as either a particle or a wave. Later research revealed...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?